Welcome on everybody to another edition of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. I'm back home in California after my own personal road trip to Oregon to watch St. Mary's take on Oregon State. We'll get into that game and just the experience at Gill Coliseum in just a bit. Talk a little bit about obviously the games coming up this week, some big ones. St. Mary's and Santa Clara on Tuesday night. Gonzaga hosting USF. The first time those two will play each other this season is coming up on Thursday. We are less than a month away from the WCC tournament. Where are the standings right now? What does it look like as we only have 3 weeks left of the regular season? So there's still a ton to be decided with what we are looking at right now, the top 6 teams and just the position, top 7 really, and how the position is going to be for the single bye, the double bye, and the triple bye. Again, as we know, the WCC tournament is set up in a way that really benefits the higher seed that you are. So we'll get into what that currently looks like in just a bit. But let's go over first what happened on Saturday. And the results of Saturday, the win-loss part, very chalky. It was picking up wins, St. Mary's, USF, Santa Clara, Gonzaga, Washington State. All as expected. They were all the favorites. They were all facing teams that they should beat. St. Mary's getting over on Oregon State, USF beating LMU on the road, Santa Clara getting a win against San Diego, Gonzaga at Pacific getting the win there, and Washington State eking out a win against Pepperdine, but still picking up the victory. A critical one for them as they snap that 5-game losing streak. But I'm going to start with Oregon State and St. Mary's. And my road trip up to Gill Coliseum, which was it was a fun weekend for me. It's like just doing a road trip. I started off actually going to Bend, first time in Bend, Oregon, hit Deschutes and Crux breweries. Thanks for the recommendations for the folks who did message me on social. And then heading over to Eugene to pick up my friends, and then heading up to Corvallis to watch this game on Saturday. Good St. Mary's group there. Good crowd from Oregon State as well. Gill Coliseum, great facility. It was, again, obviously first time in that building, walking around the campus, walking around. Corvallis was really fun. We hit, I think it was Squirrel's Tavern beforehand. So good vibes all around for that one. And then, of course, the game itself. This was a game going in, a tough place to play for anybody. Like Oregon State was 14-1 at home going into this contest. That one loss being the 3-point game to Oregon. They'd beaten Santa Clara in this building. They had beaten Washington State in this building. They'd beaten Gonzaga in this building. They had some good wins, have some good wins in that facility this year. So St. Mary's coming off a loss to USF. This was one of those games where I thought this was possibly the toughest game that they would play in this 8-game stretch where they played the entire top half of the league. And to an extent, I think that the loss on Thursday to USF made the game against Oregon State just maybe a little bit easier because it refocused this group, and they put on a defensive clinic in this one, winning on the road 63-49. A lot of notes, a lot of challenges for Oregon State in this one. St. Mary's held Oregon State to 19 first half points, which was a season low. The previous low was 25. Held Oregon State to a season low for points for a game with 49. Held Michael Rataj, one of the candidates for Player of the Year, to a season low 3 points. Oregon State was held to 36% shooting overall. Only one Beaver was in double figures. That was Isaiah C. with 10. And initially, this was a game like Oregon State jumped out to an early 4-0 lead. Paulus Morauskas injured his ankle there very early in that first half. Within the first minute of the game, he had to leave. He did return. He still did play 14 minutes overall, but they didn't need him to, because it was the combination of the twin towers of Mitchell Saxon and Harry Wessels that really carried the day for the Gales. Harry Wessels had 12 points off the bench, 6 for 9 from the floor, 3 rebounds, 2 blocks. Mitchell Saxon, 15 points, 7 boards, 2 blocks for him. Mentioned like Michael Ratai only getting 3 points. This was part of the reason why. Parsafala was unable to get good, easy looks either, as Harry Wessels did a really good job against him on the defensive end. And Augustus Marciulionis orchestrated the entire game. 18 points, 7 for 9 from the field, 10 assists, 4 steals. He has looked every bit the part of the player of the year from a year ago this past week. Great performance against USF, even though we didn't see it was USF defense did take him away down the stretch of that game. But he came back and had two very different halves. He was very much he was the scoring point guard in the first half, 16 of the 18 coming in that first period. And then it was 8 of his 10 assists coming in the second half as he switched and transitioned that game to being more the facilitator and getting others involved as he opened up the offense a little bit more. Great result for St. Mary's. Obviously not a great look for Oregon State, but not an unexpected result at the end of the game. Oregon State still does sit at 7-5. They're still right in the mix there for that second seed. Honestly, like they're not that far detached from the rest of that group, and we'll get into that. St. Mary's getting back in the win column, holding serve. They are 11-1 in conference now, still a game and a half up on USF for that top seed. And for St. Mary's, they needed, to an extent, I feel like they needed to lose one of these games to kind of get right. And this is a quad one game that they were able to get on the road. They had 2 quad ones this week, and they split the 2 on the road. You know what? That's a good week. And a loss to USF did not hurt them in the net, did not hurt them in KenPom. It only helped USF to start to climb back into a little bit of a better ranking themselves. And St. Mary's, tough week coming up, and we'll get into that. Santa Clara and Washington State, both at UCU Pavilion. So definitely some notes there of what we're going to see going into this week for St. Mary's as they are looking at the end of this tough stretch of games, all against the top section of the league, 5-1 to this point in those first 6 games. For Oregon State, they're still in the mix. I think it's all of their 2 games back of second place, that being USF. They still have plenty of opportunities, and actually, honestly, we'll get them to the schedules themselves, might be better set up than any of the rest of the teams that are in that window. Gonzaga, St. Mary's, Santa Clara, USF. Oregon State might be the team that's best set up to really do well down the stretch. So for USF and LMU, this game, USF coming off a big win against St. Mary's, there's always this potential of a letdown, especially against a team like LMU that has played well at home. Beat Santa Clara, beat Oregon State, beat Nevada, all in that building. And USF needed to find a way to keep the momentum going, to play to keep the LMU offense from getting going, because that's what usually is the separator in games against the Lions, is whether or not the offense is going to be there. The defense has been their strong suit most of the season, and it's really if that they shoot a little bit better, they rebound a little bit better. That's how they become dangerous against teams going into their building. And so USF went down to LA, went into that building, and did end up getting the 72-66 win. USF was up by double digits multiple times in this game, but LMU climbed back into it and was in it late. It was a 2-point game with less than a minute to go, or USF led by 2 with less than a minute to go, and got it to Javon Porter on a mismatch with Ryan Beasley, and Beasley was smart enough to be able to draw the charge. It was the right call. Like you could see just how well positioned Beasley was, and Beasley has been playing really well in the last few weeks. He had 18 points off the bench to go with his great defense that we saw. Marcus Williams with 19. Alex Merkviladze and Will Johnston both had 14 apiece for LMU. So USF holding on to that second place spot as of now, 10-3. It's also their 20th win of the season, so I believe that's season number 8 of 9, in which the Dons have been a 20-plus win team. Still a half game up on Gonzaga, 1 up on Santa Clara, 2 up on Oregon State. They are in position to be in position, and they get Gonzaga at the kennel this week. So this is the time. They haven't played Gonzaga yet, and but are done with St. Mary's, done with Santa Clara. They still have to get Oregon State once. They have done some of the heavy lifting. Split with Santa Clara, split with St. Mary's. Still some heavy lifting to do with the Zags coming in. And now looking at where we are right now, that game at Chase Center on March 1st could end up being the game that decides who is the second seed going into the WCC tournament. All these teams are so close, and the schedules and the opponents the rest of the way, I think, are going to be a massive factor in what we're going to see in the standings. And we could end up seeing a very unfamiliar 1 through 4 seeds than we're used to seeing in years past. Now, one of the teams that isn't necessarily in that top grouping, but is still going to be in one of the conversations, is Washington State. Now, Washington State is currently sitting in 7th, and they did get the win on Saturday against Pepperdine, 87-66. But this was a game that Pepperdine was in control the entire time. It was back and forth for a bit, but Pepperdine was able to get up by double digits in the second half. They got up by 12 with 6:17 left. Stefan Todorovic had 30. Like, everything was going Pepperdine's way in this one. And then in those last 6 minutes, Washington State outscored the Waves 24-9. Ethan Price had 7 down the stretch. You had Isaiah Watts hit a big 3 to tie it at 85. And Pepperdine had a shot at the very end. Todorovic did have a chance to win it, but his shot was blocked by Price. It snaps a 5-game losing streak for Washington State. All 5 of their starters were in double figures. They get a week now to rest for St. Mary's on Saturday. They're back to 6-7, a half game behind LMU for that 6th seed, and that is a critical jump point. That 6-7 line. 7 means you're going to start on Friday. 6 means you're going to start on Saturday. And honestly, like, I think it's really just about saving that extra day, because right now, initially you kind of think, okay, the 6th seed would play the 3, which then plays the 2, and they wouldn't have to see the 1 seed until Vegas. But on that track line, that also probably means you have to see Gonzaga earlier in the tournament, probably much earlier than you would like to see them. But that's still a conversation to be had about how that's all going to finish. For Pepperdine, Dovidas Bukta, 19 points. Mo Odom, 18 and 11. Bobakar Koulibaly, 15 and 8. This was a heartbreaker for Pepperdine. This felt like it was one they should have had. And it's a team that is still trying to climb out of that bottom rung at the moment. That drops them to 3-8 in league play, 2 games behind Washington State. So with all likelihood, Pepperdine will end up finishing in that bottom 4 of league play. So now it's just what they need to prevent themselves from playing in that first round game on Thursday. And so as of right now, looking at the standings, you have St. Mary's at the top at 11-1, USF right behind them, a game and a half back at 10-3. And that is right now, that's the semifinal. Those 2 would advance automatically to the semis on Monday. Advancing to the quarterfinals on Sunday would be Santa Clara and Gonzaga. Gonzaga would be the 3 seed right now. They are 2 back of USF, they're 2 back of St. Mary's. Santa Clara 2.5 back of St. Mary's, a half game behind Gonzaga for that 3 seed. In the third round, which would start on Saturday, it's Oregon State and LMU, those two fighting for 5 and 6. That 7 seed, Washington State right now is starting on Friday. And they are a half game back of LMU, a game and a half back of Oregon State. But they're also done with both of those teams. They're going to have to do work against others and hope that LMU and Oregon State fall back to them to get out of that Friday start date. Which brings us to what games are remaining in WCC play. And between St. Mary's, USF, Santa Clara, Gonzaga, Oregon State, even putting LMU and Washington State in there, even though like they're fighting for that 6-7 and everyone else still has the possibility of being in that semifinal round. All of them feels like there's still a lot of challenges left. No one has the easy road except for maybe one team of this group. But I'll start with St. Mary's at the top because right now they have 6 games left. It's Santa Clara, Washington State this week, both at home, Portland. Then they will head to Spokane to take on the Zags. Then the final week of league play, they're at LMU and then home for Oregon State. Now we've already seen St. Mary's beat everyone in this stretch. They've beaten Santa Clara. They've beaten Washington State. They've beaten Portland. They've beaten Gonzaga. They've beaten LMU. They've beaten Oregon State. They've beaten everyone here. But that doesn't mean that we won't see different games. Washington State only lost by 5 and was in that game the entire way and honestly controlled that game the entire way until the last few minutes. Santa Clara, they, for some odd reason, do not play well against St. Mary's in their own building. They played much better against them at UCU Pavilion a year ago. At Gonzaga, that is still a tough place to play, and St. Mary's did only win by 1. So let's not forget that this was still a game that could have been won by Gonzaga late. At LMU, mentioned how tough the Lions have been at home. So that is not an easy one. That is not something you can overlook. In Oregon State, Oregon State has had its problems on the road, so maybe this is the one of the big games where you're like, well, maybe Oregon State actually won't be able to match up well with St. Mary's, especially what we saw just the other night. But end of the season, a road game for OSU on a senior night, can play spoiler a little bit. Maybe Oregon State shows up in that one. So St. Mary's schedule is tough, but it's also against teams that we've seen them take care of business against across the board. For USF, second place, they're holding on to that. I don't like the game and a half between they and St. Mary's is probably a little bit too much, I think, to overcome, only because when I look at what they have left, this is a team that still has to play Gonzaga twice, and they have to go to Oregon State. Now, in between that, they do have at San Diego and Pacific, which they have handled their business against both of those teams already this season, so I'm not too concerned about those two, but it's Gonzaga twice and Oregon State. And USF, so at the very least, like they already have 10 wins, so I would even pencil in that they have 12 right now, but I don't know if 12 is going to be good enough to get you second place. With Santa Clara and Gonzaga so close behind, this could turn very bad for USF in the last few weeks. And because any one of these teams could be in second and any one of them could end up dropping all the way to 5th still. And so playing your best in these games is still going to be tough. USF, this is a tough stretch. Gonzaga twice is going to be is a rough go, even if that last one is going to be a quote home game at Chase Center. Santa Clara might have, they and Gonzaga might have the toughest schedules remaining. And for Santa Clara, they start at St. Mary's on Tuesday. Then they host LMU, who they already lost to. Then they go to Washington State. Tough place to play at the Palouse. Then they get Gonzaga again. And then they are at Pacific to close out league play. They have lost to 3 of the 5 teams that they have beaten 2 of the They have lost to 2 of the 5 teams that they will play in these last 5 games. But looking at that Gonzaga game, even if it's at Santa Clara, we have seen what Gonzaga tends to do in the second matchups with these teams. I mean, I think you'd be hard pressed to find anytime. Even St. Mary's has only, I think, swept Gonzaga twice in maybe like the 20-year run that they have had. So beating Gonzaga twice in a single season, especially in the regular season, not counting the tournament, is a tough task. And we're asking Santa Clara to not only win at St. Mary's, win at Washington State, beat Gonzaga a second time, but take care of business of LMU, who they have already lost to, and then a tricky game at Pacific at the end. This is not to say that Santa Clara is obviously not talented enough to do it, because they are. The question here is whether or not they're going to be good enough throughout this entire stretch and not have those inconsistencies to get a few of these wins. Right now, sitting at 9-4, this is a challenging spot. Because this is very easily, looking at this could end up being, they could go 1-4 in this stretch, or they could be 3-2. And honestly, that's probably the best mark I would expect out of Santa Clara in this stretch. 4-1 would be amazing if they could get to that mark. Even if, let's say, you chalk up LMU because it's at Santa Clara, and Pacific because that's the 10th place team in the league, as win-win. Okay, I have to then find 2 more wins between at St. Mary's, at Washington State, and Gonzaga. And as much as Washington State has struggled recently, they are still more than capable of beating anyone in the league. Like, they have the offense. They just need to play enough defense and take care of the basketball, which they've been doing a little bit of a better job as of late, to be able to pull out these wins, especially if they're hosting in this scenario. So Santa Clara, this could go really well, or this could go really poorly, and either scenario seems realistic for the Broncos. For Gonzaga, I mean, we talked last year at this time that they had a really tough end of conference schedule, but also, like, Gonzaga started playing really well toward the end of conference play. And you can definitely make the case that Gonzaga's playing better. That you look at what they did to Oregon State, you look at what they did to Pacific, you look at the way they've played some of the teams in the last week or so, that it looks better. It looks much better than it did, especially on the defensive side of the ball. But now, this is gauntlet number 2 for the Zags. They start with USF on Thursday, then Pepperdine in the middle of this. After that, the last 4 games of WCC play: at Washington State, St. Mary's, at Santa Clara, at USF. 3 of the last 4 on the road. And 2 of these games, you have already lost to these opponents. You've lost to St. Mary's, you've lost to Washington State. Sorry, Washington State. You lost to Santa Clara, lost to St. Mary's. There's already 2 losses in there that there's already 2 games you've lost to these opponents. Again, now, back to they don't lose twice to very many teams in a single season. That's true. And I do think that's going to hold a factor when you think about those 2 games. That said, USF, I think, is in better position right now than maybe they have been to get one of these games against the Zags. Washington State is going to look for at least some level of revenge for not playing as well as I think they probably thought they would for the game at the Kennel. Now they'll be able to host at the Palouse, and that might be a little bit better of a situation for them. St. Mary's is going to come into that game with the possibility of that being the game where they can clinch the league title. And so there's going to be a lot of motivation for St. Mary's. Obviously, there's always motivation for St. Mary's to get a win in that scenario, but even more so the fact that they could do it against their rival in their building on senior night. So there's a lot that's going to go into that game as well. I mean, you have 4 games against the top 4 in the league in the last 6 games for Gonzaga. This this is about as tough of a stretch, especially late in conference, as the Zags may have ever seen. And there's still a level of prove it that they have to do. Like they've been beating up on Pacific, beating up on Portland. We know that Oregon State struggles away from home, and yes, that was a massively impressive win. But they still have to be able to get the wins in the end. There's still something to play for. It's not even just like proving it or whatever else for your own pride. It's they still have to get to the 2 seed. There's still a realistic possibility that Gonzaga will not play on Monday in the WCC tournament. That they will have to start on Sunday. The wild thing is there is still an actual possibility they could end up playing on Saturday. They could start in that third round game, which I don't think is actually going to happen, but it is mathematically a possibility that it could. So with the games that are left, Gonzaga, this is not a pushover. This is not going to be easy down the stretch. And they probably do have I think they have the toughest, they and Santa Clara, for the rest of conference play. Now, the team that may have the easiest road, the team that is going to look like they're going to take advantage of the scenarios that they have, is Oregon State. The next 4 games for them: at Portland, Pacific, at Pepperdine, at San Diego. Now, that said, we know that they have struggled on the road, albeit they have handled the bit. They've taken care of the teams that they're supposed to beat. And going into these 4, they're supposed to beat Portland. They're supposed to beat Pacific. They're supposed to beat Pepperdine. They're supposed to beat San Diego. Those 4 should be wins for the Beavers. It's the last 2 that are going to really change the fortunes of the Beavers when it comes to the WCC tournament. And that's because the last 2 are USF and at St. Mary's. So they will have to head to the Bay Area for the last 2 games. They've already lost to USF, they will play 2 Bay Area teams. USF will be up in Corvallis. And that's a USF team that beat Oregon State, I would say, pretty resoundingly. They were up by 20 at one point in that game and ended up being a 12-point game at the end, or 10-point game at the end. And so we saw what happened with them against St. Mary's in Corvallis, and now they have to travel to Moraga for the season finale. All that said, I look at the other schedules and I see 4 wins right away, and that would give Oregon State, that would get them to 11 in league play, and is at least going to put them in the conversation, I think, for the 3 or the 4. I don't think that's going to be enough. 11, 12, I don't think is enough to get you to the 2 seed. I do think it will be good enough for you to get 3 or 4, which is right now Oregon State is on the outside looking in. And mathematically, look at, with all those teams separated by 4 games, St. Mary's, USF, Gonzaga, Santa Clara, Oregon State are all separated by 4 games. It's very possible that Oregon State could end up the 3. It's very possible that USF could end up the 5. It's possible that Gonzaga ends up the 2. It's possible that Santa Clara ends up the 2. It's possible Santa Clara might even drop all the way down to 5 or 6. Like these possibilities exist. Because again, what happens, and I talked about that Santa Clara could go 1-4. If LMU does what I think it's capable of doing, they could very well actually leapfrog Santa Clara in the standings. So all of these are possibilities. All of them could happen in the next few weeks. And that's what's going to make this last month so exciting to see what's going to happen in WCC play. So for this week, the games that are coming up: Tuesday, Santa Clara at St. Mary's, LMU and Pepperdine. Thursday, you have San Diego at Pepperdine, Pacific at LMU, Oregon State at Portland, and then USF at Gonzaga as the nightcap. Santa Clara at St. Mary's on Tuesday. The Gales won the first matchup 67-54. This was the game where St. Mary's went on that massive 30-0 run. They held Santa Clara scoreless for nearly 13 minutes. They were plus 14 in rebounding. It tied Santa Clara's season low in points with 54. It wasn't a good look. Now, they crawled back into it late as St. Mary's started pulling its starters and everything else. So this is going to be a bit more. There's some pride going into this one because it feels very similar to what we saw a year ago when St. Mary's did go into Santa Clara and just boat raced them out of that building. And then a few weeks later, when they met each other again, it was a very different game. Now, St. Mary's did jump out to a big lead in the first half of that one, but then Santa Clara crawled back in on the back of a Dama ball and made that a single-digit game, made that a close game late, and a few bounces here or there probably had an opportunity to win that game in Moraga. Now, for Santa Clara to have to do what they're capable of doing, they're going to have to rebound the ball better. That plus 14 is not going to do it, or that minus 14, I guess I should say, for Santa Clara, not going to cut it against St. Mary's. The defense was probably fine overall, but you have to clean up the boards. You have to do the work there. You still have to take care of the basketball. Also, shoot. Santa Clara is so dependent on shooting the three that while they did do it well late, it was too late for the Broncos in that game. They have to shoot three well. They have to rebound well. And right now, honestly, you have to try to slow down Augustus Marcialonis. He is starting to pick up steam. He's starting to look like one of, if not the best player in the league the last week or so. And because if he is starting to raise his game, they need someone like Carlos Stewart. They need someone like Adama Ball. They need someone like Elijah Mahi to also do the same. Now, I do think that St. Mary's still holds the edge in this one. Santa Clara is going to have a very tough time on the glass, and that if they can hold, again, much like USF did, if they can keep that close, then I think they will have a shot of getting that game in Moraga tomorrow night. Now for the other big game Thursday, USF at Gonzaga. This really feels it's guards against the front court because the USF guards, Beasley, Thomas, Williams, might be the best backcourt in the WCC. They are the most electric. They are the guy that any one of them could end up scoring 30 in a night. NGU has made a bad habit out of letting guys get their best night of the season against them. We saw it happen multiple times over. We saw it happen with Santa Clara when obviously them scoring 103 points a few weeks ago. That said, since that game, Gonzaga has not let anyone score more than 62 points. And that is a testament to how well that they have focused on their defense the last few weeks. It also is a testament to when they are motivated, when they are have their ass kicked in the right direction, this team is a good defensive team. And that was even St. Mary's. They scored only 62 points. Now, St. Mary's is okay with playing in lower scoring games. But this is a game that USF is going to have to show that what they did against St. Mary's is they can duplicate. Can they duplicate managing the rebounding? Because they were a positive in that game against St. Mary's. And I have thrown out a lot of concerns since Newberry went down that they have been a different team, and they were for 11 games. And in the last few, it feels like that they have figured something out. Lingard has raised his game. Barry Wong has raised his game. Ryan Beasley is starting to round back into form after some early season injuries. We're starting to see them play like the team we saw earlier in the season. And it's taken some time, but they're here. They got a big win against St. Mary's. They backed it up with a win against LMU on the road. Now they have to go up to the Kennel and try to do the same. Because honestly, for their at-large hopes, this is a game that would go a long way to actually putting their name back into the conversation, at least in a tiny way. I still think there are a little bit of ways, and Vegas is still the way that they get in. But both these teams defend well. They both take care of the basketball. They both rely heavily on the three. And this is, I think, as good an opportunity for USF to get a win against Gonzaga as they have had in a long, long time. They have not beaten Gonzaga since 2012. They have not won in Spokane, anybody's guess, since 1989. So they've never even won in the new kennel. They last won in the old kennel, and they last won when there were probably even members of the coaching staff who weren't even born yet. This is going to be a monumental task for USF because of the history behind it, but this group is fully capable of pulling the upset. Now, that said, I do still think that Gonzaga they should hold form on the boards. They have been good with second chance points. I'm looking at Ben Gregg as being that Energizer bunny to get them those second chance opportunities. And a lot of the times it works out for Gonzaga. But also looking at Caleb Battle, because he, to me, is the X factor for this team. Like, when he goes, this is one of the better teams in college basketball. When he is not, this team becomes very beatable. And it also feels like one of those games that's going to come down to the stretch, that's going to come down to a few possessions late in this game. And another challenge for Gonzaga. Can they pull one of those games out? They are 0-7 in games in which that have been 2-possession or overtime games. And they need to prove that they can win in those scenarios. Now, obviously, it doesn't mean they should intentionally try to get in that scenario just to see if it happens, but this feels like a game where we could see it. And can Gonzaga figure out how to play in those tough stretches? Because we know USF can. We saw them do it against St. Mary's just last week. They closed that game out well. They finished strong. They did not falter. They saw that against LMU the other night as well. They have figured out a way to play well down the stretch in those close games. And Gonzaga has not done that yet. So if this is a close game, we get down to the end, USF is going to have a very good chance of pulling another upset. I'm going to say upset. I know that Gonzaga is behind them in the standings, but it's been a while since USF has actually beaten them in either location. And if they can keep Gonzaga off the boards reasonably well, keep Ben Gregg in check, if they can limit Caleb Battle, they're going to be in the game at the end and have a shot to get a win at the kennel for the first time since 1989. All right, well, that'll do it for this episode of the Unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and also follow along on social media at Unofficial WCC Pod, at Post by Zach. So we'll be also doing a Saturday live to prep for the Saturday slate of games as well. The Saturday games, Pacific at Oregon State, Pepperdine at Gonzaga, USF at San Diego, LMU at Portland, but the big one is Washington State heading to Moraga for its debut against St. Mary's. So a lot to get into on Saturday morning. Well, thanks for watching, everybody, and I will catch you later.